Welcome the Lord's chosen. There is a point where mercy clocks out and consequence clocks in, quietly, officially, and without debate. Most people think justice arrives with sirens, shouting, and dramatic announcements. It doesn't. Real judgment shows up like paperwork being processed on a regular weekday morning. No warning, no emotion, just signatures, timestamps, and doors that no longer open the way they used to. That's the part nobody prepares you for. The moment when chaos isn't loud anymore, it's organized. Here's a fact most people overlook. Nearly every major downfall in history wasn't triggered by a single mistake, but by a long record that finally became readable. Empires didn't fall because someone slipped once. They collapsed because too many receipts stacked up, and someone finally turned the light on. When the system stops malfunctioning in your favor, it doesn't need drama. It just needs alignment. What makes this moment different and unsettling is that nothing new had to happen. No fresh crime, no sudden betrayal, no whistleblower riding in like a movie hero. Everything that's unfolding now was already written down somewhere. Files existed, logs existed, memories existed. The only thing missing was permission. And once that permission is granted, reality doesn't rush. It proceeds, methodically, relentlessly, like it's got all the time in the world, because it does. There's also a strange calm before the collapse, the kind where people are still smiling publicly while privately counting exits that no longer exist. They're cracking jokes, posting as usual, pretending nothing's wrong. Meanwhile, the walls are being measured, not metaphorically, but literally. That's when the humor writes itself. Nothing is funnier than someone acting untouchable while being slowly, officially touched by consequences. Comedy doesn't always need a punchline. Sometimes it just needs timing. And let's be clear, this isn't about rage, revenge, or someone finally getting what's coming. This is about finality, about moments when influence expires, protection times out, and the universe stops entertaining negotiations. When God signs the warrant, he doesn't make a speech. He lets the process speak for itself. So if this feels quiet, if it feels eerie, if it feels like something irreversible has already started moving behind the scenes, that's because it has. This isn't the beginning of the chaos. This is the end of the delay. Number one, this didn't turn legal until it turned spiritual first. Long before anyone mentioned charges, courts, or consequences, something invisible shifted. That's the part most people miss. They think justice starts when papers are filed or when someone gets arrested. In reality, it starts when protection is quietly withdrawn, when the covering that kept things hidden expires, when doors that used to open easily start sticking for no obvious reason. That's when trouble really begins, even if everything still looks calm on the surface. At first, nothing looks dramatic. Life goes on. People are still laughing, posting, moving around like nothing has changed. But behind the scenes, momentum has reversed. Favors stop working the way they used to. People who once rushed to help suddenly need more time. Information that was once buried becomes easier to access, not because someone suddenly became brave or honest, but because resistance is gone. When the spiritual permission is revoked, reality starts cooperating in uncomfortable ways. This is why consequences often feel delayed, but then arrive all at once. It's not sudden, it's accumulated. While everyone thought nothing was happening, the groundwork was being laid. Records were stacking, patterns were forming, loose ends were tying themselves together quietly. By the time the legal system steps in, it's usually just confirming what's already been decided at a deeper level. What makes this unsettling is how ordinary it feels. There's no lightning bolt, no warning announcement, just a steady tightening. People sense it before they can explain it. Sleep gets lighter, jokes feel forced, confidence starts to sound rehearsed. That's not guilt talking, That's awareness catching up. Somewhere inside, they know the season has changed, even if they can't name why. And here's the part nobody likes to admit. When things finally go public, it's rarely because someone was hunted down. It's because the truth was allowed to walk forward on its own. Once the spiritual block is removed, the legal process doesn't struggle. It flows. Paperwork moves. Witnesses talk. Systems suddenly work the way they're supposed to. So when people say it came out of nowhere, they're wrong. It came out of silence, from a decision made long before anyone noticed. By the time the law shows up, the verdict has already been written, just not in ink yet. Number 2, they confused delay with escape, and that miscalculation sealed them. For a long time, nothing happened, and they took that as a win. Days passed, then months, then years, and each quiet stretch convinced them they were untouchable. No calls from lawyers, no knocks on the door, no public fallout. In their mind, the absence of consequences became proof of innocence. But delay doesn't mean danger is gone. It just means it's being prepared properly. What they didn't understand is that time doesn't erase actions. It records them. Every extra day gave more room for patterns to become obvious. Stories that once sounded isolated started lining up. Small inconsistencies turned into clear contradictions. People who were unsure before began to connect dots they hadn't noticed. Silence wasn't protecting them, it was collecting evidence. The real mistake was getting comfortable. When someone thinks they've escaped, they relax. They talk too much. They repeat behaviors. They leave trails they would have hidden if they felt watched. Confidence makes people sloppy, and sloppiness leaves fingerprints everywhere. That false sense of safety didn't just delay consequences, it strengthened them. They also assumed that if nothing happened quickly, nothing ever would. That's a dangerous belief. Systems don't always move fast, but when they move slow, they move heavy. The longer the delay, the more thorough the process becomes. By the time action is taken, there's very little left to argue about. It's no longer one incident under review. It's a history. What really sealed it was the attitude. Instead of reflecting, they mocked the idea of accountability. Instead of cleaning up, they doubled down. They treated patience as permission and grace as approval. That's when the window closed. Because once someone mistakes restraint for weakness, the response is no longer gentle. Now the shock isn't that consequences arrived. The shock is how complete they are. Everything hitting at once, no room to maneuver, no time to spin the story. That's the price of misreading delay. It wasn't an escape route, it was the runway. Number 3, the people protecting them quietly stepped away. For years, they moved through life thinking they were untouchable because someone always had their back. Every crisis, every close call, there was a hand to pull them out, a voice to defend them, a presence that made the world pause before acting. That protection created an illusion of invincibility. It made them careless, cocky, even reckless. They believed loyalty was endless, and that favors could bend reality indefinitely. But loyalty has limits, and favors have expiration dates. When the time came for consequences to arrive, that safety net silently vanished. The people they counted on didn't announce their departure. They didn't confront them, warn them, or even signal that something was shifting. They simply stopped showing up. Calls went unanswered. Doors remained closed, and suddenly the same networks that seemed impenetrable became hollow. No one defending, no one intervening, no one willing to absorb the heat. Not because anyone turned cruel, but because the stakes changed, and self-preservation quietly took precedence over allegiance. That's when reality hits differently. Protection isn't just about people, it's about momentum. When someone has champions in their corner, Even the worst mistakes can be ignored, delayed, or twisted. Once those champions leave, the momentum reverses. Everything that was postponed, ignored, or hidden starts moving forward. Systems work the way they were always supposed to, and events that seemed improbable suddenly feel inevitable. What makes it so brutal is that this departure happens without fanfare, without confrontation, without explanation. It leaves the person in a state of disbelief, scrambling, realizing that the world they thought they controlled was never theirs. It was lent to them. And when they try to reclaim it, it's gone. Those who stepped away aren't enemies. They're mirrors, showing exactly how fragile the illusion of power was. In the end, being left alone exposes more than vulnerability. It exposes truth. It strips away the safety, the arrogance, and the delusions. And that's when consequences hit hardest. When someone realizes that the people they depended on were never truly theirs to count on, and the protection they relied on was temporary from the start. Number 4, they are being judged more for what they hid than what they did. The truth about consequences is rarely about the original act itself. It's about the layers of secrecy, manipulation, and deception that followed. Most people fail to see that hiding a crime, covering tracks, twisting narratives, and exploiting trust compounds guilt far beyond the initial misstep. Systems, institutions, and even fate itself don't just react to the visible wrongdoing. They react to the chaos someone tried to bury. That's why what feels like a sudden collapse often comes after years of careful concealment. The acts themselves were always obvious to those paying attention, but the real problem was the attempt to make them invisible. Every lie, every manipulation, every effort to rewrite reality adds weight. It's like stacking blocks on a foundation that's already shaky. One block might not topple the structure, but hundreds stacked in secrecy inevitably will. People notice patterns before they notice individual actions. Small inconsistencies accumulate, contradictions become obvious, and suddenly what was once plausible now looks like a meticulously orchestrated deception. The more someone tries to control the story, the faster the story turns against them. That's why exposure feels so brutal. It's not just a reaction to one failure. It's a reckoning for the entire hidden agenda. The danger in hiding isn't only legal or public, it's relational and systemic. Trust that once existed evaporates when patterns are revealed. Networks that once protected and supported start questioning motives. Even allies begin stepping back, not out of malice, but because the concealment shows unreliability. What was hidden eventually surfaces, and when it does, the impact is magnified. The crime alone might have been survivable, but the cover-up makes it unavoidable. In the end, people fall not because of what they did, but because of what they thought they could hide. Attempts to control perception, manipulate outcomes, and escape accountability become the very chains that trap them. The collapse is inevitable, not because justice is late, but because truth refuses to remain buried. Secrets can delay consequences, but they also intensify them, and that's why exposure feels absolute. The hidden always finds a way to be revealed, and when it does, it strikes harder than the original act ever could. Number 5, their fear isn't about prison, it's about exposure. What people don't realize is that the panic they see isn't caused by the thought of being locked up. Prison, in the grand scheme of things, is survivable. People adapt, routines form, walls become familiar. What terrifies them is the shattering of their carefully constructed image. They built a persona, a mask, a version of themselves that could move through the world untouchable, untarnished, admired or feared as needed. That mask made them untouchable in their own eyes and in the eyes of others. When exposure starts, the mask cracks, and the panic spreads faster than any legal consequence ever could. The fear is about what happens when everyone realizes they weren't who they claimed to be. When the truth emerges, it doesn't just reveal actions, it rewrites the story they told the world about themselves. The person who smiled, charmed, manipulated, or commanded respect suddenly becomes someone else entirely. Friends, colleagues, and allies who were impressed or intimidated are left staring at someone they don't recognize. That recognition, that moment of being fully seen, hits harder than any verdict. People can survive a sentence, but surviving public disgrace when your reputation collapses is a different kind of punishment. It's also why their behavior becomes erratic. The panic you observe, the rushed calls, the over-explaining, the sudden defensiveness, isn't just desperation. It's a reaction to the loss of control over perception. Once the image they've spent years crafting is in danger, everything they do becomes a frantic attempt to patch cracks that are already too deep. Influence that once protected them suddenly fails, because the fear isn't legal, it's relational. It's the anxiety of knowing that when their true story comes out, the court of public opinion will remember every lie, every manipulation, every cover-up. Ultimately, exposure is permanent. Prison might end, fines can be paid, but once the mask is gone, there is no recovery. The fear that grips them now is not temporary. It's a preview of living in a world where everyone finally sees them clearly. That is why the terror looks disproportionate, why it feels unstoppable. They aren't afraid of consequences, they are afraid of truth. Number 6, the evidence didn't appear, it was released. The moment people realize they are cornered, they often assume that something new had to happen to bring them down. They picture whistleblowers swooping in, secret files being discovered, or hidden cameras suddenly showing what no one should have seen. The truth is far simpler and far more terrifying. The evidence was always there. The difference is that it was finally allowed to move. For years, things were blocked, ignored, or dismissed. Records sat in dusty files, conversations were forgotten, and digital trails were overlooked. The delay wasn't absence, it was containment, and containment has a limit. Once the gates opened, everything that was waiting flowed out. It doesn't take creativity or coincidence, it takes permission. Witnesses speak not because they suddenly grew courage, but because the environment that once protected the guilty no longer shields them. Documents that seemed buried were always readable, now they're accessible. Data that was once locked behind bureaucracy suddenly becomes actionable. The system itself doesn't change, it simply obeys. And when that happens, the effect feels unstoppable because it's cumulative. Every small truth that was previously ignored now stacks up, and suddenly a mountain of proof forms where there was once only whispers. The speed at which it moves is what shocks people. They feel like events are accelerating, like the world has finally turned against them overnight. In reality, the world hasn't changed. It's the same system that failed before, but now it's operating correctly. The release of evidence is quiet, methodical, and devastating because it doesn't announce itself. It doesn't shout. It just becomes undeniable. Every denial they've ever made, every story they've spun, every attempt to hide their tracks is confronted simultaneously. The guilty can no longer negotiate, stall, or redirect. What's truly frightening is that release is permanent. Evidence doesn't retract, witnesses don't forget, digital trails don't vanish. The moment it's allowed to move, the consequences begin, and there's no reversing momentum. The world is no longer defending them, it's simply showing them the results of their choices. The evidence didn't appear. It was always there. It just finally got its chance to speak. Number 7, they're being hit from multiple angles because the judgment is coordinated. This isn't a single misstep unraveling. It's every corner of their world collapsing at once. The legal issues, the financial consequences, the social exposure, even personal relationships, they're all converging simultaneously. It's not chaos, it's precision. Systems rarely act in isolation, but when judgment is authorized, everything lines up. What seems like coincidence is actually orchestration. The walls aren't falling one at a time. They're moving in unison, leaving no room to maneuver, no weak point to exploit. They thought they could handle one front at a time. That was the arrogance that cost them. Most people imagine consequences as linear. First one problem, then another. But coordinated judgment doesn't give anyone that luxury. While they scrambled to contain one area, another was already collapsing. Their energy is spread thin, their focus fractured. Each attempt to recover in one space only exposes weaknesses in another. It's exhausting, demoralizing, and intentionally relentless. This is why their panic is disproportionate. They aren't just reacting to one consequence. They're reacting to the entire system realigning against them at once. The coordination isn't always visible. Banks don't call in debt because they're vindictive. Legal documents move because the system is functioning. Colleagues turn away because patterns finally make sense, not because of personal vendetta. Witnesses speak because they feel safe, not because someone encouraged them. Each part acts independently, but the sum effect is undeniable. By the time they notice, it's too late to stop anything. What's most striking is how total it feels. It's as if reality itself is correcting a balance they spent years disrupting. No single piece of evidence or testimony could have done this alone. It's the alignment of all moving parts that overwhelms. The system doesn't need to rush or threaten. It simply allows everything to fall into place. And that's the real terror. Coordinated judgment doesn't feel random or unpredictable. It feels inevitable. No escape hatch, no temporary fix, no charm, no influence can slow it down. The collapse isn't messy, it's exact. They're experiencing what it's like when the consequences of every misstep, every lie, every manipulation finally arrive together, leaving no corner untouched. Number 8, their past victims are no longer silent, not because they planned to speak, but because they're no longer afraid. For years, the people they hurt stayed quiet. Fear was the invisible chain that kept mouths shut and truths buried. Threats, manipulation, and intimidation created an illusion of control, convincing them that no one could or would speak up. That silence was powerful. It made the guilty believe their actions were invisible, that accountability could be postponed indefinitely. But fear is fragile. It doesn't last forever, and when it fades, the consequences arrive in full force. What's happening now is not bravery, it's the absence of fear. Victims no longer feel the weight of the threat that once kept them in line. They don't need permission or courage. The protection the guilty once relied on has quietly evaporated. Without that shadow looming over them, they speak freely, and suddenly what was hidden becomes undeniable. Every story that was once dismissed, every detail ignored, begins to line up. The fragments of truth that seemed inconsequential alone now form a clear, unstoppable pattern. One person breaking silence sparks another, and momentum builds faster than anyone expected. This shift is devastating because it's cumulative. It's not just one accusation. It's the intersection of hundreds of moments that the guilty believed were private. Lies that were told to explain behavior crumble under scrutiny. Manipulations are exposed as manipulations. People who once seemed loyal or indifferent reveal where they stood, intentionally or not. What the guilty thought were isolated incidents are now connected, revealing a full picture of deceit, cruelty, and exploitation. The effect is more than legal or procedural, it's existential. The guilty suddenly realize they were never untouchable. The networks of fear and control they relied on are gone, and the narrative they crafted is being dismantled piece by piece. Each voice that speaks adds weight. Each memory recalled strengthens the case against them. Exposure becomes unstoppable because it isn't coming from outside pressure alone. It's rising naturally from the very people they tried to silence. When victims stop being afraid, the world itself starts paying attention, and that is when reckoning becomes inevitable. Number 9, the spiritual charge is heavier than the legal charge. Most people think consequences are measured only in human terms: fines, prison sentences, lawsuits, or social backlash. They forget that some actions carry weight far beyond the physical world. When someone deliberately manipulates, exploits, or destroys, the universe doesn't just shrug and wait for human law to catch up. There's a force that tracks imbalance, that measures the harm done, and that applies pressure long before anyone else notices. That's why legal consequences, when they finally arrive, feel overwhelming. They're just the tip of what has already been building. Every act of deception, every abuse of trust, every decision made to benefit oneself at the expense of others leaves a mark. Not a mark you can see on paper, but a mark that ripples through networks, relationships, and even systems designed to uphold order. The guilty may think they're safe because paperwork hasn't arrived, because no one has called them out yet. That sense of safety is an illusion. The spiritual charge has been accumulating quietly, relentlessly, and when the time comes to manifest, it manifests with force. Legal processes, social exposure, and personal fallout are only the human reflection of what has already been decided at a higher level. This weight is heavier because it doesn't negotiate. It doesn't respond to charm, excuses, or influence. While human systems can be delayed, manipulated, or ignored, this force moves with precision, unaffected by strategy or status. That's why collapse often feels sudden and absolute. From the outside, it may seem like events escalated overnight, but in reality, what is happening has been in motion for years. What finally breaks the surface is just the human-side manifestation of a truth that has been gathering energy far longer than anyone realized. And it's not selective, it's inevitable. People who have lived in secrecy, who relied on manipulation and intimidation, suddenly find that nothing they do can protect them. The weight of their actions, spiritual and moral, converges with the legal and social consequences, creating a force they can't stop, can't bargain with, and can't escape. It's not revenge, it's finality. And that's why, when judgment hits, it feels unstoppable, all-encompassing and inescapably absolute. Number 10, they're realizing too late that repentance isn't the same as regret. Right now, the panic you see is often mistaken for genuine remorse, but it isn't. Regret is a reaction to consequences. It's an "I wish I hadn't done that" feeling that surfaces when the cost of your actions becomes undeniable. Repentance, on the other hand, is a change in alignment, a shift in behavior and intent before the storm hits. The difference is crucial. By the time these people start regretting, the moment for true correction has passed. They're not sorry for what they did in a meaningful way. They're sorry they got caught. That distinction matters because it's the difference between survival and total collapse. They scramble to apologize, to explain, to spin the narrative, but none of it works. Regret alone can't undo what's already been done. Every attempt to regain control now only highlights the gap between their words and the reality of their actions. The world isn't moved by sorrow that arrives after the damage. It's moved by consistency, by accountability, and by evidence of change over time. When remorse is timed too late, it's not mercy they encounter, it's consequence. This is why their desperation feels intense and erratic. It's not fear of punishment alone. It's the realization that nothing they do can change how they are seen, how their actions have already impacted others, and how the momentum of justice is already in motion. They thought influence, charm, or intimidation could buy time, but regret cannot bribe a system that has been quietly aligning against them. The panic isn't just emotional, it's strategic. Every move is an attempt to patch holes that have already swallowed them. The truth is brutal. Genuine repentance could have altered the course years ago, maybe even prevented the collapse. But now, they are left with regret, masquerading as remorse, and it won't help. The consequences will come whether they apologize, cry, or explain themselves. Understanding this distinction too late is a painful awakening, and it's why they look frantic, irrational, and completely unprepared. By the time regret arrives, the process is unstoppable, and the reckoning is absolute. Number 11. The system didn't suddenly turn righteous, it turned aligned. People like to tell themselves that when consequences hit, it's because the world finally decided to do the right thing. That's comforting, but it's wrong. Systems rarely wake up with a moral compass. What actually happens is alignment. The pieces that were once disjointed, mismanaged, or manipulated finally start moving in unison. The network that seemed broken begins functioning the way it was always meant to, and suddenly everything the guilty relied on to stay untouchable stops working. What looks like righteousness isn't virtue, it's order catching up. For years they believed they could bend the system to their advantage. They assumed loopholes, connections, and influence would shield them indefinitely. That illusion only works while the parts are misaligned, when timing, oversight, and procedure fail to intersect. But alignment doesn't require morality. It requires that everything fits together. Files, witnesses, digital evidence, financial records, and human behavior all begin converging. The same channels that failed them before now operate flawlessly, and the effects feel sudden, even overwhelming. This is why the collapse appears unstoppable. It isn't that someone decided to take them down. It's that the mechanisms of accountability finally functioned as intended. Courts process cases, banks follow protocol, information flows, people act according to their true priorities. The result is inevitability. Influence, charm, and intimidation no longer hold any weight, because the system itself no longer accommodates deviation. The terrifying part is how quiet this process can be. There's no dramatic declaration, no rallying cry. The system doesn't care about revenge or recognition. It simply starts working in harmony. Each piece that falls into place accelerates the next, and momentum builds in ways the guilty never anticipate. What once seemed random or delayed suddenly becomes precise, unavoidable, and total. In the end, the lesson is clear. Downfall rarely comes from a sudden moral awakening in others. It comes from the alignment of reality with truth, from the functioning of structures that were always there but rarely executed. When the system aligns, it doesn't negotiate and it doesn't forgive, it simply delivers. And for those who relied on chaos to protect them, that delivery feels like the end of the world. Number 12, their downfall is instructional, not personal. What's happening isn't just about punishment or retribution. It's a lesson that echoes far beyond the individual. The collapse of someone who operated in secrecy, manipulation, or entitlement serves as a warning to everyone watching. The universe, or whatever system governs consequence, doesn't target randomly. It sends signals. Those signals are loudest when the failure is visible, absolute, and unavoidable. That's why the panic, the chaos, and the exposure feel so extreme. It's meant to show what happens when the rules of order are ignored. The people experiencing this downfall are rarely the first to understand it. They think the consequences are personal attacks, vendettas, or bad luck. In reality, they are living examples of the law of cause and effect in motion. Every lie, manipulation, and attempt to control outcomes accumulates into a pattern that others can now see. When it collapses, it creates clarity for everyone else. The lesson is not just don't do what they did, but this is what happens when arrogance, secrecy, and exploitation collide with truth and timing. Their story becomes a roadmap for what to avoid, a live demonstration of accountability in action. This instructional nature makes the downfall feel deliberate, not in a conspiratorial sense, but in the sense that consequences often serve as examples. Systems, legal, social, spiritual, tend to reinforce patterns. When someone abuses a position or betrays trust, their collapse is not private. It becomes a benchmark for others, a cautionary tale that silently reshapes behavior. The shock, the humiliation, and the speed of it all are amplified because it's meant to be noticed, internalized, and remembered. At the same time, it's brutally honest. The individuals themselves may never admit that their story has meaning beyond themselves, but the impact ripples anyway. Observers see how quickly influence can evaporate, how protection can disappear, and how patterns of deception eventually catch up. Their downfall isn't personal, it's functional. It exists to educate, to warn, and to preserve balance. And that's why it feels so overwhelming. The lesson isn't confined to them. It is designed to resonate with anyone who thinks they can evade consequence without paying the cost. Number 13. Once judgment starts, negotiation ends. The moment the wheels of consequence begin turning, all attempts to bargain, explain, or delay become irrelevant. Before this point, there might have been loopholes, backdoors, or delays that allowed them to spin stories, manipulate perceptions, or buy time. But once judgment is active, the window for negotiation closes completely. Everything they relied on, the charm, influence, connections, or clever explanations, suddenly loses power. The legal processes, the exposure, the social fallout, they move forward regardless of excuses or intentions. There is no maybe anymore. Everything is set in motion, precise and unstoppable. This is why panic becomes so pronounced. People start making frantic calls, sending messages, offering explanations, and trying to repair networks that no longer respond. Every attempt to regain control only highlights how powerless they are. Negotiation isn't just ineffective at this stage, it's almost comical in its futility. The reality is no longer a flexible narrative. It's a series of events aligned perfectly to deliver accountability, and nothing they do can bend that reality back in their favor. What makes this particularly brutal is that this point doesn't announce itself. It creeps in quietly while life still feels normal. One day delays are possible, the next delays are impossible. Systems that once allowed manipulation now follow procedure without exception. Allies who once intervened now step back. Witnesses who were cautious now speak. Each element of consequence moves forward as it was always supposed to, and the guilty realize too late that they have no leverage left. The end of negotiation also exposes truth in a way that excuses never could. All the lies, denials, and cover-ups are confronted simultaneously, and there's no room to soften the impact. The collapse doesn't stop until all the pieces fall into place. It's absolute, relentless, and total. Once judgment starts, the game changes completely. There is no turning back. There is no bargaining table. The only option left is to face the outcome fully, and that realization hits harder than any previous fear or warning ever could. Number 14. This is what it looks like when God doesn't argue. He concludes. When the moment of judgment arrives, it isn't accompanied by debate, warnings, or prolonged negotiation. There is no back and forth, no chance to plead, and no opportunity to bargain for leniency. It is absolute, swift, and final. The difference between this and human justice is stark. Humans argue, delay, justify, and manipulate. God doesn't waste energy convincing anyone. When the decision is made, it moves with a force that doesn't bend, pause, or falter. The collapse, the exposure, the unraveling, everything is a natural extension of that conclusion. The people experiencing this often fail to recognize it because it feels like chaos, randomness, or coincidence. In reality, it is precise, methodical, and inevitable. Every action, every hidden truth, every manipulation, and every attempt to control outcomes has been accounted for. Once the point of finality is reached, the universe doesn't need to remind, threaten, or negotiate. It simply allows the consequences to unfold fully, like a verdict that was decided long before anyone noticed. This is why the moment feels sudden, overwhelming, and inescapable. It is sudden to the human eye, but inevitable to the order that governs cause and effect. There is also a clarity in this type of judgment that humans rarely experience. The guilty are stripped of illusions, masks, and pretenses. Influence stops working. Protection disappears. Delays that once seemed to offer safety vanish. All the networks, systems, and barriers that supported evasion fall away, and the truth is laid bare, undeniable and total. The weight of exposure and accountability is impossible to ignore because it is complete. What makes it extraordinary is how quiet it is. There is no spectacle, no dramatic announcement, no fire or storm, just a conclusion that cannot be debated, escaped, or postponed. It is absolute, and that is the power of a decision that doesn't argue. It simply executes. When God concludes, the guilty realize they have already lost, and there is nothing left to do but face the consequences of a reality that has finally caught up with their actions, completely and irrevocably. Conclusion. What you've just seen isn't a story about luck, coincidence, or human timing. It's the inevitable result of actions, choices, and hidden patterns finally catching up with their source. Every attempt to hide, manipulate, or control the narrative only added weight to what was coming. The delay, the allies who abandoned them, the stacked evidence, the victims finding courage, the alignment of systems, the absolute exposure, all of it converged into a force that could not be stopped. This isn't just punishment. It's clarity in motion, a reckoning that leaves nothing ambiguous, nothing negotiable, and nothing hidden. When judgment comes in this way, it's more than legal, more than social. It's spiritual, precise, and unavoidable. What looks like chaos from the outside is actually order asserting itself. Every element, every domino, every unseen factor contributes to a total conclusion. The guilty discover that influence, charm, and manipulation can't save them. They realize that regret is worthless when it arrives too late, and that exposure is permanent. The system doesn't need to argue, plead, or justify itself. Once the decision is final, it moves forward like a force of nature, relentless and absolute. And for everyone watching, there's a lesson here. This is what happens when deception, arrogance, and exploitation finally meet the natural and inevitable consequences of their actions. It's instructional, not personal. It's a reminder that patterns matter, that every action has a cost, and that the truth, no matter how long suppressed, always finds a way to move forward. It is brutal, it is precise, and it is final. If this resonated with you, if it opened your eyes or even gave you chills, don't just let it pass. Hit that subscribe button to join the channel, like the video. If you feel the weight of this reality, comment your thoughts below to join the conversation and share it with someone who needs to see the truth for themselves. The story doesn't end here. There's more clarity, more revelation, and more lessons waiting, and you don't want to miss a single moment of it. Stay alert, stay aware, and remember, truth doesn't negotiate, it concludes. Stay blessed always.